Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones. This podcast is recorded by me in my church, which is called Northwood Christian Church, the church that I pastor. And these episodes contain reflections on the Bible passages that we talk about in that church on Sundays. And so, if you like what you hear, you should perhaps come by for a visit. See us in person. I'd like to have a conversation. So if you live in Indianapolis or nearby, you can find us at 4550 Central Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana. That's 4550 Central Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana. Ours is a church that strives to live into what we talk about on Sundays, what we talk about in these sermons, in fact, much of which has to do with the ways God is calling us all to participate in the restorative healing work God is doing in our world. So if you are looking for ways to get involved in similar work, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out and write to me at my email. It's Heath, Heath, at IndyNCC, that's INDYNCC.org. And that way you can correspond with me, we can have a discussion, or I might answer any questions that you might have. Or if you'd prefer a less direct mode of contact, as folks typically do nowadays, texts instead of calls and whatnot, you might peruse our website at your convenience. And it admittedly needs an update, but the information on there is good and updated and current, and it has information about our building, our tenants, our schedule, our tenant schedules. And by tenants, I mean the different entities that we house: yoga studio, art studios, a karate dojo on the third floor, schools for children, elementary age and preschool, the Indianapolis Women's Chorus. We've got a little bit of everything happening in our building at Northwood, and we're proud of that, and we think that you should know about it. So please check us out when you can. Even if you're not interested in the church stuff, there are other things here for you as well. But enough about us. I should take a moment to give a shout out to the All Indiana Podcast Network. The All Indiana Podcast Network produces the Northwood Podcast, our podcast, but along with many others made in Indiana and often about topics of interest to Hoosiers. That's the silly name that we call ourselves. Now, our podcast is religious in theme, obviously, but the topics on the Indiana Podcast Network run the gambit from sports to news, events to cooking. There really is something for everyone. So if this sounds like something you want to check out, if you listen to podcasts or just getting into them, you can do so by visiting www.wishtv.com/podcasts. That's www.wishtv.com/podcasts. Now, here in a moment, I'll introduce the passage from the Bible that we'll be considering today. But first, we must pause for an ad break for our podcast audience. If you've listened to one of these before, you know what this means. Or if you've watched these on YouTube, you know that for our podcast audience, this means a break for ads. And for us, it just means a moment of silence where we sit and wait, because we're not big enough on YouTube to have any ads. So invite your friends to subscribe or like. That aside, it is time for some ads. And so let's just sit here and wait. And we're back. And today, we'll be going over a passage found in the Gospel of Luke. It's a well-worn, familiar story, a story about two pregnant women in unusual circumstances. More on that in a moment, but first the text. It's found in Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38. That's the Gospel of Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38, and it reads: In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. And he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. And now your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son, and this is the 6th month for her who was said to be barren. For nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. I know, Mary does get the lion's share of attention around this time of year, as well she should. But I want you to notice that our nativity story tells of not one, but 2 pregnant women. 2 pregnant women even discussed today in today's passage, and I'd like to discuss both of them here. Mary's cousin Elizabeth's story was told just before what we just read from Luke's narrative. She was mentioned briefly at the end, but her story was told more in full at what just came before what we read. If you haven't read it before, it involves a woman in her old age who had, up until very recently, been unable to conceive a child. Apparently, she had tried throughout the course of her life with her husband, and she could not. Why does this matter? Well, it mattered in the time that she lived. Children were considered a blessing from God, a deliberate, on-purpose package from above. So a woman who was able to conceive many children, under the right circumstances, of course, she had to be married, was thus considered blessed by God. The children she bore was a sign of God's favor over her life. There is even a strain in both Jewish and Christian theology, one that runs back before the time of Jesus, that suggests that signs of God's favor will manifest in your life by way of children, a comfortable life, and other material considerations. So basically, if good things happen to you, God is happy with you. If bad things happen, then one should figure out what one needs to do to get back on the right side of God's favor. This belief that I'm discussing here, commonly held, I've ran into it many times in my ministry, heard it preached from pulpits, read about it in books about Christianity. This belief is reflective in the narrative that we read itself, held by Elizabeth and her community, apparently. We didn't read that part today, but at the start of Elizabeth's story, which comes before the one we did read, we are told from the onset that she and her husband were, and I'm quoting here, righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. So she should be swimming in children, but alas, no children. About this, her family and neighbors likely wondered if Elizabeth did something, or had caused something bad to happen, or had some secret that had caused God to close up her womb. The shame that she felt within her community is reflected in the verse just before the text that we read today. When Elizabeth is far enough into her pregnancy to have confidence that it will take, she says, and I'm quoting the verse just before today's text, verse 25 of chapter 1, she said, "This is what the Lord has done for me in this time, when he looked favorably on me and took away my disgrace, the disgrace I have endured among my people." That line, disgrace I have endured among my people, grabs me, for it reflects the deep shame someone can feel when they are disgraced in some public way. For her, her inability to conceive was her shame in her culture, in her time, in her community. And most thought was reflective of a life poorly lived. What gives? It says at the beginning she and her husband were righteous, kept all the rules. Before we move on, I think you should know that I believe with my whole heart that this is bad and damaging theology, what we're discussing here. This idea that our material comforts, possessions, and even the number of children we have is contingent on our good behavior. Why I think this? Because, you know what? I've known many quote-unquote good people who do not appear to be blessed. At least there seems to be little by way of reward for their virtue. In fact, I've known people who I would consider to be saints, who have lived harder lives than they deserved, even until the very end. By the metric we're discussing here, about blessing being a sign of God's favor, it would appear that God had no favor for them. I'll never forget the words of one dying man in immense pain from his fractured hip. He had lived, in my estimation, a very good life, if not exemplary. His children and grandchildren thought so, and I don't think you could get any better references than that, his children and grandchildren. Anyway, he was in pain. He had fallen, he had broken his hip, and he wanted to know why this pain. Why was he deserved of this pain? He said, I don't know when, but at some point in my life, I must have done something. I don't know when. This bad theology that we're talking about, this belief that the righteous are blessed and the wicked have only what they deserve. I don't know when that came into his mind and in his heart, but he believed it. And for him, the pain he was feeling was evidence of God's displeasure. He told me that he was racking his brain, trying to remember if there was something he had done, even when he was a child, that would make him worthy of such suffering. All I can say is, what a tragedy that a good man should die with those thoughts on his mind. Similarly, it was a tragedy that Elizabeth had to carry this undeserved shame of her barrenness. The beliefs that we hold about God really do matter, it seems. In the times that we're considering here, it was believed that Elizabeth's inability to have a child could be a sign of her moral failings. In fact, probably was a sign. And I'm sure her friends were polite about it when the question of children came up in those gossipy circles, but the subtext around her would probably go something like, I wonder what's going on with Elizabeth and her husband Zachariah. I've heard they've been trying to have a baby for years, but haven't been able to. Word is, she's barren. Barren. Now, there's a bleak word. If I said that a landscape was barren, you'd get the picture. Desolate. Void of life. Imagine what it may mean to call a woman that. Think of the implications. And Elizabeth considered herself to be barren. Imagine how lowly she must have regarded herself. Have you ever felt barren in this sense, void of life? Everything before you, your future, as seemingly empty, barren as Elizabeth's empty womb? What a shame that you should feel this way. Probably your feelings are undeserved. Even so, don't give up. When my dying congregant looked at me with his desperate questions, I told him what I believe. I told him that his suffering was not the result of anything he had done, except to fall and break his hip, but there's no shame in that. Rather, the result is from our very fallible and limited bodies. I told him what Jesus said about how it rains on the just and the unjust, rain being symbolic for blessing. In other words, God blesses us all, regardless of what we do. This is God's love, even love for those who cause harm in our world. I've seen it. Blessing fall on those who cause harm in our world. The love of God for us all, I guess. That's grace. And this seemed to comfort him. The thought that his suffering was not something he brought onto himself, as is often the case with the rest of us, this assumption that we bring it on ourselves. The question becomes, how will God help us in the immediate moment, through the pain and onto what's next? I told him, you did not cause this, but God meets us in the middle of it. And you weren't there, but I can tell you with confidence, God did show up for my dying congregant and held him and us. But this is not new. God has always held God's children and seen them through their suffering. And here God held Elizabeth through it, and then called her unexpected life in her belly a blessing, and called it in an unexpected time. She became pregnant against all odds. She found life. She was no longer considered to be barren, but here's the thing. In God's eyes, she never was. But as I said from the onset of this talk, there are two pregnant women in the story, and the reading that we did at the onset had to do mostly with the second one, with Mary, mother of Jesus, each approaching the prospect of pregnancy from different circumstances. Elizabeth's circumstances and Mary's different. If Elizabeth's problem was that she wasn't pregnant enough, or barren, as we've been saying, Mary's problem is that she's entirely too pregnant and at the wrong time, at least from her perspective, as well as the perspective of her community. If Elizabeth's problem was that she was perceived to be barren, Mary's problem is that she's got way too much going on, both in her belly and in life in general. Imagine the world from her perspective. She's swimming in the same waters as her cousin Elizabeth, with all of the ways and practices of her time, with all of the judgments and expectations. She was expected to demonstrate her worthiness before her community and God by getting married and having lots of children as evidence of God's blessing for her. But now it's all turned upside down. She's pregnant, and she's not supposed to be. She's engaged to be married, but now that decision seems in limbo. What we know from what comes next in the narrative is, that Mary finds herself at the beginning here of a grand journey, one that will involve heartache but joy, sorrow but gladness, and ultimately an entirely new hope for the world, new possibilities opened up by the life and death of her son, the one growing inside her, the one that will come as a result of this announcement. But all of that is in the future. All she knows from her perspective is that she did not ask for the life growing in her belly. She did not ask for the tumultuous life that would follow her, unpredictable, at times uncertain, at times scary. That's the life that she would have as she continued to walk alongside her son, Jesus. I'm sure if she could, she'd have dialed up something different for herself, at least initially, if she were given the full picture. I mean, we all know that hindsight is 20/20. We know that. And in the grander scheme of things, these events, we know these events in Mary's life were but the beginnings of a new thing God was doing. But as I keep harping on about, from Mary's perspective, in that moment when she got the news, this is disaster. Her life is over. And the angel who brought the message, Gabriel was the name, seemed to know that this message would unsettle or even frighten Mary. So the angel's introductory words tip the hand a bit, words that seem to be meant to help assuage Mary's anxieties about what is about to happen with her. And here is the message, quoting from verses 28 through 30. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one. The Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. And the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God." Do not be afraid. These are the same words that Jesus will later repeat to his disciples when they were afraid decades later. But his mom learned it first, how to face her fears and the uncertainty and the confusion and to proceed forward. But in the immediate moment when fear has you in its grips, what one needs to know is if there is a way out of the situation that gives rise to fear. The answer of the Gospels of our faith is 1,000,000 times yes. There is hope in the face of fear. When your life is turned on its head, as Mary's was, all can seem lost. Unless there is a truthful voice speaking into your life, reminding you that God will continue to call us to life, even in the most dire of circumstances. The truthful voice that spoke to Mary was the angel Gabriel's, and he painted a future for her, a picture of a future for her child's life, one beyond what she could have hoped. She is told that he will be one empowered by God to liberate the people. She is assured that her pregnancy is a work of God's Spirit, not happenstance, not an accident, not a fluke, not a catastrophe, and that God's Spirit would overshadow her in the years to come. Then, as evidence of what God can do, the angel shares a testimony. A testimony in a church setting is when someone stands up to tell the wonderful and unexpected things God has done for them in their lives. And in this case, the angel tells Mary about her cousin Elizabeth's pregnancy, her testimony, Elizabeth's testimony, which occurred, as we just discussed, against reason and against the odds, barren as she was, no longer as if she ever was. And the angel concludes that narrative, telling Mary about her cousin, with these words, verse 36 through 37. And now, says the angel, your relative Elizabeth is in her old age and has conceived a son, and this is the 6th month for her who was said to be barren, for nothing will be impossible with God. By this testimony of her cousin's life and joy, Mary is convinced that she can trust God. She can trust in the one who brings this message too, whatever may fall. So she answers with the now iconic lines. Verse 38, then Mary said, here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. Then the angel departed from her. 2 pregnant women, 2 powerful testimonies. Elizabeth's testimony teaching us that even when we are allegedly barren, we aren't. Not really. For one, our worth is not bound to what we do, how many children we have, or our social position. But for seconds, and here is the most important point, even if your life is in fact barren, God will call life from those places too. Your life can be seen as the empty womb ready to receive life. Nothing will be impossible for God, who called us and all creation into being. Of course not. So if you feel as though your life is empty, void of life, wait for it. Elizabeth's testimony is meant to give us hope. Her story is meant to help us consider those barren places in our own lives and to trust that God may well plant in us seeds of life. God's Spirit was with Elizabeth. God's Spirit was with Mary. God's Spirit is with you too. 2 pregnant women, 2 powerful testimonies. Mary's testimony teaches us that even when life is chaotic, unpredictable, and unpleasant, we need not be afraid. Nothing will be impossible with God. Even your own circumstance has a way out of it. And if that way out is through it, then let our word echo Mary's when she said, here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. And you will find your own words when the time comes. But what I want us to see is that no matter whose story we consider, Elizabeth's and her barrenness and Mary's with her confusion and calamity, God is faithful and calls us to life. If your circumstance seems barren, void of life, void of hope, options, a way forward, know this. We serve a God who calls life from even the most barren of places. Water from a rock, as the story goes way back in Exodus, or water into wine. Or 5 loaves into 2 fish, Jesus somehow able to feed a multitude. Or just take today's story as an example. A woman who had thought she was barren, but discovered that she was full of life. Or if you relate more to Mary's testimony, I want you to see that God is calling life, saving the lost, even in the midst of this confusion in life. Just as Mary's head must have been spinning, reeling at the news she received, our heads are spinning perpetually, it seems, at the news that we read about or watch on TV. Mary felt as though she were entering a whirlwind, or had been forced into a whirlwind rather. And I feel as though we've been living in a whirlwind these past several years. Life is crazy, moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it's hard to get a grip on things sometimes. And Mary must have felt similarly during this phase of her life. After all, she was human like you and like me. Same fears and anxieties, hopes and dreams. Hear the words of the angel. Do not be afraid. If this describes you, then allow the words the angel gave to Mary to comfort her, to find you as well. Do not be afraid, for you have found favor with God. The life that is about to find you will likely not be a literal life growing in your belly, although if so, congratulations. But more realistically, the life that will find you will be, well, we just don't know, but it will find you. Against the odds, God will do this. Or as the text reads in verse 37, nothing will be impossible with God. I like how these not impossible possibilities in this text are placed in our future. Nothing will be impossible. Placed in the future on Mary's horizon, on ours. This is a forward-looking, hopeful perspective. It acknowledges that we are not in control of our future, but that God is with us as we walk, crawl, or sprint into our futures to help us through seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And God is in every moment opening up possibilities for life near and around us. Mary, she carried her hope in her belly. New life was growing there. Her son Jesus, who would leave our world and our lives changed forever. I don't know what it will be for you, but God is still at it, calling you, me, us to life. So do not be afraid, for you are not barren. You are full of life and potential that, if you'll allow it, God will call to the surface. But whatever may fall, whether we are feeling barren, overwhelmed, or a little of both, as many of us are feeling nowadays, a mix of it all, I hope that we can find the courage in this moment to say, along with Mary and many other saints besides, here I am. I'm here to help aid in the world's healing. Let it be with me according to God's desires. And with this prayer on our lips, life will find us. And now, nothing seems impossible. More things seem possible. In fact, our future is on the horizon. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.